They said money could buy anything. They said power was absolute. But on a rainy Tuesday in November 2024, Mateo Blackwood, the wealthiest alpha in North America, was on his knees. Inside the heavily guarded Blackwood Estate, his 4-year-old son, Leo, was taking his final breaths. 100 of the world's most renowned healers, witches, and doctors had walked into that room, and 100 had walked out in failure. The boy was gray, cold, and fading. But just as the clock struck midnight, a girl with holes in her sneakers and a mop bucket in her hand did what the experts couldn't. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the scandal they tried to bury. This is the story of how an invisible omega changed everything. The rain battered against the reinforced glass of the Blackwood Estate in upstate New York, blurring the lights of the waiting ambulances that had been parked outside for weeks. It was a grim parade. If you were driving past the iron gates on Route 9 that night, you would have seen the flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement, a silent vigil for a dying prince. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and despair. Mateo Blackwood stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the master suite. He hadn't slept in 4 days. To the human world, Mateo was a ruthless venture capitalist, a man who moved markets with a whisper. To the hidden world of the lycanthrope, he was the alpha king of the eastern seaboard. He was 6'4" of pure muscle and dominance, a man who could crush a boulder with his bare hands. But right now, looking at the small, frail body in the king-sized bed, he looked like a ghost. His beta, a man named Kalen, giving orders into a headset by the door, hung up and looked at Mateo. "Dr. Eris Thorne is here, Alpha," Kalen said, his voice low. "He is the 100th. Send him in," Mateo rasped. His voice was wrecked from growling at incompetent doctors and screaming at the moon. Dr. Thorne wasn't just a doctor. He was a high warlock from the European Coven. He swept into the room wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars, carrying a briefcase made of dragon hide. He exuded arrogance. The air in the room grew heavy with his magic. "Alpha Blackwood," Thorne nodded, barely bowing. "I was told the boy has the burning fever. Child's play." 99 others thought it was child's play, Thorne, Mateo said, turning around. His eyes were bloodshot, glowing with a faint, dangerous amber hue. "Now they are banned from my territory. If you fail, you join them," Thorne scoffed, walking toward the bed. Little Leo Blackwood looked tiny in the expanse of silk sheets. His skin was translucent, veins showing through like blue spider webs. He was sweating, yet shivering violently. The cub, as the pack called him, was the only heir. If he died, the Blackwood bloodline ended. Thorne began his ritual. He pulled out vials of shimmering liquid, lit sage that smelled of sulfur, and began chanting in a dead language. The room temperature spiked. The monitors beeped erratically. Violet light danced around Leo's small chest. For a moment, it looked like it was working. Leo's breathing stabilized. The color returned to his cheeks. Mateo took a step forward, hope, dangerous, agonizing hope, flaring in his chest. "Is it done?" Thorne wiped sweat from his brow, smiling smugly. "As I said, child's play. The dark energy has been dispersed." But before the words fully left his lips, the machine screamed. A long, piercing whine. Leo's back arched off the mattress. He let out a sound that wasn't human, a high-pitched yelp of pure agony. Foam bubbled at the corner of his mouth. The violet light Thorn had summoned turned a sickly necrosis green and imploded into the boy's chest. "Fix him!" Mateo roared, the room shaking as his alpha aura exploded outward, cracking the window glass. I don't understand," Thorn stammered, backing away, his expensive vials shattering on the floor. "His body, it's rejecting the magic. It's eating it. Get out!" Mateo snarled, his claws extending, ripping through the expensive fabric of his shirt. "Alpha, please. I just need to recalibrate. Get out before I rip your throat out." Kalen grabbed the warlock by the collar and dragged him out of the room. The door slammed shut, leaving Mateo alone with the sound of his son choking on his own fluids. Mateo rushed to the bed, his large, trembling hands hovering over his son. He couldn't touch him. Every touch seemed to cause the boy more pain. "Leo," he whispered, tears finally spilling over his hardened cheeks. "Leo, fight it, please, pup. Don't leave me." In the corner of the room, unseen by the Alpha, a service door creaked open. It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a witch. It was the girl who came to collect the hazardous waste bins. Her name was Sarah. Serafina Hale. She was 22, but she looked 18, stunted by years of malnutrition. She wore an oversized gray uniform that hung off her thin frame, and her sneakers were held together with duct tape. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low, a packless wolf taken in by the Blackwood Estate only to serve as cheap labor. She held a mop bucket, her knuckles white. She should have left. The Alpha was in a rage. Being in the room was a death sentence. But Sarah could smell something the Alpha couldn't. She could smell something the High Warlock had missed. She didn't smell a virus. She didn't smell a curse. She smelled oleander and silver ash. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that if she didn't step forward in the next 30 seconds, Leo Blackwood would be dead. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the wet, rattling breaths of the boy. Mateo Blackwood had collapsed into the armchair beside the bed, his head in his hands. The most powerful predator in the state was utterly defeated. Sarah took a step forward. Her cheap rubber soles squeaked on the polished hardwood floor. Mateo's head snapped up. His eyes were wild, predatory. "Who is there?" Sarah froze. Every instinct in her Omega DNA screamed at her to drop to her knees and bare her neck, to submit. But she looked at the bed. She looked at Leo. She had seen Leo playing in the gardens months ago, before the sickness. He had been the only one at the estate who ever smiled at her, once offering her a half-eaten cookie through the kitchen fence. I said. Mateo stood up, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Sarah's chest. "Who are you, and why are you in here?" "He's not sick," Sarah whispered. Her voice was hoarse from lack of use. She rarely spoke to anyone. Mateo narrowed his eyes. "What?" "He's not sick," she said, louder this time, though her legs were shaking. "And the magic. The magic is feeding it. That's why the warlock made it worse." The door burst open again. Kalen, the beta, rushed in, having realized the maid was in the room. "Alpha, I apologize. This Omega." She slipped past security. "I'll remove her immediately." Kalen crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing Sarah's thin arm. His grip was bruising. "You stupid girl. You want to die?" "Let me go!" Sarah struggled, her eyes locked on Mateo. "He's been poisoned. It's silver ash mixed with oleander extract. It mimics the burning fever, but magic accelerates the toxin." Kaelin scoffed, dragging her toward the door. "Ignore her, Alpha. She's the kitchen scrub. She failed her high school biology classes." "Wait!" Mateo didn't shout, but the command stopped Kaelin dead in his tracks. The Alpha walked over to Sarah. He towered over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. He leaned down, sniffing the air around her. He smelled bleach, old soap, and underneath it, the faint, sweet scent of rainwater and wildflowers. Fear. "You say poisoned," Mateo said, his voice dangerously calm. 100 experts said virus or curse. "Why should I believe a girl who cleans my toilets?" "Because the experts were looking for magic," Sarah said, looking up into his amber eyes. "They weren't looking for murder." The word hung in the air. Murder. Mateo looked at his son, then back at Sarah. "If you touch him and he gets worse, I will kill you myself. Immediately." "I understand," Sarah said. "Let her go, Kaelin," Mateo commanded. Kaelin released her, looking furious. "Alpha, this is insanity." "I am out of sanity," Mateo roared at his beta. "I have nothing left. Let her try." Sarah didn't waste a second. She rushed to the bedside table. She ignored the expensive equipment. Instead, she grabbed the pitcher of water and a small bowl. "I need salt," she said, "and charcoal. Do you have activated charcoal pills in the first aid kit?" Mateo nodded to Kaelin. The beta hesitated, then ran to the bathroom, returning seconds later with a bottle of charcoal capsules. Sarah worked with trembling hands but focused precision. She crushed the charcoal, mixing it with the water to create a black sludge. Then she did something that made Kaelin gasp. She took a silver letter opener from the desk and sliced her own palm. "What are you doing?" Mateo growled, stepping forward. "My blood," Sarah said, wincing as she squeezed drops of crimson into the black mixture. "I'm an Omega. My blood isn't powerful, but it's neutral. It acts as a binding agent. It will pull the silver out of his system." She sat on the edge of the bed. Leo was barely moving now. She lifted his head gently. "Leo? Leo, honey, I need you to drink this." The boy didn't respond. His jaw was locked. Sarah didn't force it. Instead, she dipped her finger into the mixture and rubbed it on his gums. Then she placed her hands, one on his forehead, one on his heart. She didn't use a spell. She closed her eyes and pulled. Omegas were often considered weak because they couldn't fight. But in the old packs, Omegas were the caregivers because they could absorb pain. They were emotional sponges. Sarah focused on the burning sensation in Leo's blood. She visualized the poison, the prickly, silver wire wrapped around his heart, and she mentally grabbed it. "Give it to me," she thought. "Give it to me." A shockwave of pain hit her. It felt like her veins were being filled with acid. Sarah gasped, blood trickling from her nose. "She's hurting him," Kaelin yelled. "No!" Mateo watched closely. "Look!" Leo's breathing hitched. Then he coughed, a wet, deep cough. He turned his head and vomited a clear, metallic-smelling liquid onto the sheets. Sarah didn't stop. She kept her hands on him, shaking violently as she absorbed the residual toxicity. Her skin turned pale, gray patches forming under her eyes. She was taking the damage onto herself. Leo coughed again, and then his eyes fluttered open. The murky haze was gone. They were bright blue. "Daddy," he croaked. The sound broke Mateo Blackwood. He fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in the mattress near his son's hand. "I'm here, Leo. I'm here." "I'm thirsty," Leo whispered. Sarah pulled her hands away. She felt dizzy, her vision tunneling. She had done it. She had siphoned the immediate danger. She tried to stand up to give the alpha space, but her legs gave out. She crumpled toward the floor. She expected to hit the hardwood. Instead, she was caught by two massive, warm arms. Mateo Blackwood held her, looking down at her with an expression of shock and something else, something possessive. "Kaylin," Mateo barked, his voice sharp and authoritative again. "Lock down the estate. No one leaves." "Alpha?" She said it was poison. Mateo looked at the Omega girl who had just saved his world. "That means the poisoner is still in the house." Sarah looked up at Mateo, fighting unconsciousness. "It smelled like lavender," she whispered, her eyes drifting shut. "The person who poisoned him smells like expensive lavender and sulfur." Mateo went rigid. His eyes turned black. He knew exactly who wore that scent. It was the woman currently sitting in the drawing room downstairs, waiting to comfort him when his son died. Lady Genevieve, his fiancée. The storm outside had not ceased. If anything, it had intensified. Thunder rattled the antique chandeliers of the Blackwood Estate, but inside the Alpha's master suite, the world had narrowed down to the rhythmic, miraculous sound of a steady heartbeat. Beep, beep, beep. Mateo Blackwood remained on his knees, but he was no longer praying. He was holding a body. Sarah, the invisible girl from the scullery, was limp in his arms. She was terrifyingly light. That was the first thing Mateo noticed, the sheer lack of mass. It was as if she were made of hollow bones and air. He could feel the ridges of her ribs through the thin, rough fabric of her gray uniform. It was a tactile accusation of his failure as a king. A wolf in his pack was starving, right under his nose, while he dined on steak and wine. "Kaylin?" Mateo said. His voice was no longer the roar of a wounded animal. It was cold, composed, and infinitely more dangerous. "Get Dr. Harrison, the medical doctor. Not a witch, not a healer. A man of science." Kaylin, the beta who had served Mateo for 10 years, looked at the unconscious girl with a mix of confusion and shame. "Yes, Alpha. And what do I do with her? Shall I have the staff move her back to the Omega quarters?" Mateo looked down at Sarah. Her face was ashen, contrasting sharply with the dark lashes resting on her cheeks. A trickle of blood from her nose had stained his silk shirt. She had just filtered lethal poison through her own bloodstream to save his son. "If you move her 1 inch from this room," Mateo growled, the vibration deep enough to rattle the water glass on the nightstand, "I will strip you of your rank." Kaylin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Understood. She stays. She takes the guest bed. Now." While Kaylin rushed to fetch the pack's physician, Mateo carefully lifted Sarah. He moved with a tenderness that contradicted his reputation as the butcher of Wall Street. He laid her on the velvet chaise lounge temporarily, grabbing a cashmere throw to cover her shivering frame. He turned back to Leo. The boy was sleeping. It was a natural sleep, not the coma-like trance of the last week. The gray pallor was receding, replaced by a faint rosy flush. Mateo reached out, brushing a lock of sweat-damp hair off his son's forehead. The heat coming off the boy was gentle, healthy. "You're safe," Mateo whispered, a vow forged in iron. And the one who did this to you is going to scream." Dr. Harrison arrived 3 minutes later, breathless, carrying a standard medical trauma kit. He was a balding man in his 50s, reliable and discreet. He checked Leo first, his eyes widening as he read the vitals. This is impossible, Alpha," Harrison muttered, checking the pupillary response. "The toxins have been neutralized. His liver function is returning to normal. It's like a reboot. Who did this?" "She did." Mateo gestured to the unconscious girl. Dr. Harrison moved to Sarah. He cut away the sleeve of her uniform to check her blood pressure, revealing a landscape of old scars and bruises on her upper arm, marks of manual labor and mistreatment. Mateo clenched his jaw so hard a tooth cracked. "She's in hypovolemic shock," Harrison diagnosed, working quickly to insert an IV line into her thin arm. "Her heart rate is erratic. She's suffering from severe exhaustion and malnutrition, compounded by whatever she did. She acted as a biological filter. It's a miracle her heart didn't stop." "Will she live?" Mateo asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "She's an Omega, Alpha. They are resilient, built to endure pain that would kill a Beta," Harrison said, taping the IV down. "But she needs rest, fluids, and warmth, and she needs to not be afraid. Her cortisol levels are through the roof. Even in sleep, she is terrified." Mateo looked at her. Terrified? Of course she was. In this house, she was prey. "Stabilize her," Mateo commanded. "Then guard the door. Kalen stays with you." "Where are you going, Alpha?" Kalen asked, stepping forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. Mateo walked to the walk-in closet. He stripped off his ruined shirt, the one stained with Sarah's blood and Leo's sickness. He pulled on a fresh, crisp white dress shirt and a black blazer. He fastened his cufflinks, gold wolves with ruby eyes. He looked in the mirror. He didn't look like a grieving father anymore. He looked like the king. "I have a fiancé to entertain," Mateo said, his reflection showing eyes that had turned entirely black, the sign of the wolf taking the wheel. "She's waiting for news of my son's death. I think I should go deliver the news personally." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the brass handle. He inhaled deeply. The scent Sarah had described, lavender and sulfur, was faint in the hallway, lingering like a ghost. "If the girl wakes up," Mateo said without turning around, "tell her she is under my protection. Tell her, thank you." The Blackwood Estate was built in the 1920s, a sprawling Gothic mansion designed to intimidate. The grand drawing room was a cavernous space filled with oil paintings of ancestors who looked down with judgmental stares. A fire roared in the oversized hearth, casting dancing shadows against the mahogany walls. Lady Genevieve Sterling sat on a high-backed leather wing chair near the fire. She was the picture of elegance. Her platinum blonde hair was pinned up in a complex chignon, her dress a modest but incredibly expensive black silk, mourning attire, preemptively worn. She held a glass of Pinot Noir, her manicured fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the crystal stem. Mateo descended the grand staircase. He moved silently, a predator stalking through his own territory. He watched her from the shadows of the landing. He saw her check her phone, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips before she quickly composed her face into a mask of tragic concern. "Mateo," she breathed as he stepped into the light. She set the glass down and stood up, rushing toward him with practiced grace. "Oh, darling, I heard the alarms. Is it over? Is our little Leo at peace?" She reached for his hands. Mateo let her take them. Her skin was soft, warm. Her scent hit him. Expensive French perfume, heavy on the floral notes of lavender. But underneath, just as Sarah had said, there was a chemical tang, sulfur. It was the smell of dark magic components, specifically asphodel powder, used to mask magical signatures. "It is over," Mateo said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Genevieve squeezed his hands, letting out a perfectly rehearsed sob. "Oh, Mateo, I am so broken for you. I know how much you loved him. But perhaps it is a mercy. He was in so much pain." "Yes," Mateo agreed, looking into her green eyes. "Pain. We will get through this," she whispered, stepping closer, resting her head against his chest. "The Northern Council has already called. They are prepared to recognize our union immediately after the funeral. A strong pack needs a strong alpha pair, especially in tragedy. We can start again. We can have children of our own. Strong children. Children of our own." The words twisted like a knife in Mateo's gut. She was talking about replacing his son before the body was even cold. "You seem very prepared, Genevieve," Mateo said, gently pushing her back so he could look at her face. "Almost as if you knew this would happen tonight." Genevieve blinked, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her face. "Darling, we all knew. The doctors said it was a virus." Mateo cut her off. He walked past her, toward the fireplace. He picked up the poker, idly stirring the embers. "Then they said it was a curse. Dr. Thorne said it was dark energy." "Thorne is a fool," Genevieve said quickly, a sharp edge entering her voice. "I told you not to hire him." "True." Mateo turned to face her, the firelight casting a demonic glow behind him. "But tonight, a new doctor gave a different diagnosis." Genevieve went still. "Oh? Then who is this?" "New doctor." "Not a doctor." Mateo took a step toward her. "A maid. An Omega." Genevieve let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A maid?" "Mateo, you must be exhausted. Grief is making you irrational. You're listening to the help?" She was very specific, Mateo continued, closing the distance. She mentioned oleander and silver ash. The color drained from Genevieve's face. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was instantaneous. The mask slipped. For a second, Mateo saw the monster beneath the makeup. "That's ridiculous," she stammered, taking a step back. "Oleander is a common garden plant. And silver ash, that's a restricted substance. Only high-ranking witches have access to it." "Exactly," Mateo said softly. "Like your mother. The High Priestess of the Sterling Coven." "Don't you dare accuse my family," Genevieve hissed, her sorrow replaced by indignation. "I have stood by you. I have supported you while that weakling son of yours dragged this pack down." The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Weakling?" Mateo repeated. "He was a runt." Genevieve shouted, abandoning the charade. "He was never going to be a true alpha. He was an embarrassment, Mateo. I did you a favor. I was clearing the path for our legacy." She realized what she had admitted a second too late. She clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in terror. Mateo didn't yell. He didn't shift. He simply stopped holding back his aura. The pressure in the room exploded. The windows of the drawing room shattered inward. glass raining onto the Persian rugs. The fire in the hearth flared green. Genevieve was forced to her knees by the sheer weight of Mateo's dominance. It felt like gravity had increased tenfold. "You poisoned my cub," Mateo whispered, standing over her. I had to," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. Real tears of fear this time. "The council, they threatened me. They said if the Blackwood line wasn't corrected, they would sanction us. I did it for us, Mateo." "Who on the council?" Mateo demanded. I can't say," Genevieve sobbed. "They'll kill me." "And what do you think I am going to do?" Mateo grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground as if she were a doll. Her feet kicked uselessly against his legs. "Please," she rasped, clawing at his hand. "Mateo, wait. The antidote. You need me. The poison has a secondary trigger. If he recovers, the magic will invert. He'll die within the hour unless I chant the counter-curse." Mateo froze. His grip loosened slightly, just enough for her to breathe. "You're lying," he snarled. "I'm not," Genevieve gasped, seeing her opening. "Check the monitors. It's a fail-safe. The Omega girl, she might have cleaned the blood, but she didn't break the magical bind. Check the monitors." As if on cue, the intercom on the wall buzzed. It was Kalen. His voice was panicked. "Alpha, you need to come upstairs. Now." "What is it?" Mateo yelled at the speaker, still holding Genevieve by the throat. "It's the boy and the girl. They're seizing, Alpha. Both of them. The machines are going haywire." Mateo looked at Genevieve. She was smiling now, a twisted, victorious smile. "You can snap my neck, Mateo," she wheezed. "But if I die, the counter-curse dies with me, and your son joins me in hell." Mateo roared, a sound of pure frustration, and threw her across the room. She crashed into a display cabinet, shattering antique porcelain, but she scrambled up, coughing and laughing. "You have a choice, my king," Genevieve taunted, wiping blood from her lip. "Marry me tonight. Sign the papers transferring the Alpha rights to our future line. And I will save the boy. Refuse, and you bury him tomorrow." Mateo stood in the ruin of his drawing room, the shattered glass crunching under his boots. Upstairs, his son was dying again. The girl who saved him was dying, and the woman holding the cure was the one holding the gun. "Get the papers," Mateo said, his voice dead. Genevieve straightened her dress. "Wise choice, my love." But Mateo wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his hands, watching his claws retract. He was calculating. He bought himself time. But he needed a miracle, and his miracle was currently seizing in the guest bed upstairs. The master bedroom, which had briefly been a sanctuary of hope, had transformed back into a war zone. The air was thick with the scent of distress, sharp ozone and burnt sugar. When Mateo burst through the doors, followed closely by a triumphant Genevieve, the scene stopped his heart. Leo was thrashing on the bed, his small back arching off the mattress. The monitors were screaming a high-pitched, continuous warning. But it was Sarah who drew Mateo's eye. The Omega girl had been moved to the chaise lounge, but she had rolled off in her convulsions. She lay on the rug, her body vibrating with a terrifying frequency. The most horrifying part was the visible connection, a tether of dark, nebulous energy, like black smoke, was pulsing between the boy and the girl. It was the failsafe Genevieve had promised. The magic was trying to re-enter Leo's body, and Sarah, in her unconscious state, was acting as a human shield, refusing to let it pass. She was absorbing the magical backlash intended for the boy, and it was tearing her apart. Her nose was bleeding profusely now, and her fingernails were clawing at the Persian rug, leaving shredded lines in the wool. "Do something!" Mateo roared at Dr. Harrison, who looked pale and helpless. "I can't, Alpha!" Harrison shouted back, his hands shaking as he held a syringe. "This isn't medical, it's spectral. Every time I try to sedate them, the needle melts. Look!" He held up a syringe. The steel needle was bent and blackened, as if dipped in acid. Genevieve stepped forward, smoothing the silk of her dress. She looked at the dying girl on the floor with utter disdain. "Disgusting," she sneered. "She's fighting the bind. Stubborn little rat. She's only prolonging the inevitable." Mateo spun on her, his hand closing around her throat again. "Fix him!" Genevieve didn't flinch this time. She tapped the folder she was holding against Mateo's chest. "Sign first. The blood contract, Mateo. Irrevocable. It grants me full Luna authority and ensures that if anything happens to you, I become the regent for the boy. I own the pack." It was a coup. A legal, binding coup performed over the body of a dying child. Mateo looked at Leo. The boy's lips were turning blue. The blackened veins were creeping up his neck again. "Give it to me!" Mateo snarled. He snatched the papers. He didn't read them. He didn't care about his fortune, his title, or his pride. He bit into his own thumb, drawing blood, the Lycan way of signing a binding oath, and pressed his print onto the parchment. The paper sizzled, sealing the magic. "Done." Mateo threw the folder at her feet. "Now save him." Genevieve smiled, a predatory expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Excellent." She walked to the center of the room, standing between Leo and Sarah. She raised her hands, palms up, and began to chant. It wasn't the gentle, melodic chanting of a healer. It was guttural, harsh, full of clicking sounds that made the ears ache. Salvo veniculum, redo veninum, obscurum recido. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The black smoke tether connecting Leo and Sarah snapped. Leo gasped, his body falling limp onto the mattress. His breathing leveled out immediately, the blue tint fading from his lips. The monitors quieted to a steady, rhythmic beep. But Sarah, when the connection snapped, the backlash didn't disappear. It had nowhere to go but into the vessel that was currently holding it. Sarah let out a scream that shattered the remaining window glass. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. Her body arched so high her spine seemed ready to snap. The black smoke swirled around her, drilling into her chest, her skin, her eyes. "Stop it!" Mateo lunged forward, but an invisible wall of force knocked him back. "The magic has to go somewhere, Mateo," Genevieve said calmly, stepping over Sarah's writhing body to check on Leo. "The boy is clean. The Omega. Well, she volunteered, didn't she? Consider her a casualty of war." Sarah convulsed one last time, her eyes flying open. For a split second, they weren't their usual soft hazel. They were glowing a blinding, incandescent white. Then she collapsed. Silence returned to the room. The only sound was the rain and Leo's steady breathing. Mateo crawled over to Sarah. He didn't care that Genevieve was watching. He didn't care about the contract. He placed a hand on Sarah's neck. No pulse. "Harrison!" Mateo barked, his voice breaking. Dr. Harrison rushed over with a defibrillator. "Clear!" The body jumped. Nothing. "Again! Charge to 200! Thump. Nothing." Mateo felt a coldness spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. His wolf was howling inside him, a mournful, devastating sound. Why? She was just a stranger. Just a maid. Why did it feel like he was losing his other half? "Clear!" Thump. A gasp. A wet, ragged inhale. Sarah's heart fluttered, then beat. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Weak. Threadbare. But there. "She's back!" Harrison slumped in relief. "She's in a deep coma, Alpha. Her brain activity is minimal. But she's alive." Mateo exhaled, his forehead resting against Sarah's cold hand. How touching. Genevieve's voice cut through the moment. She was standing by the door, the signed contract tucked safely under her arm. "Have the servants take her to the infirmary basement. We have a wedding to plan, husband-to-be. The ceremony is tomorrow at dusk." Mateo slowly lifted his head. His eyes were no longer black, nor amber. They were a dull, flat steel. "Get out," he whispered. "As you wish." Genevieve smirked. "Don't be late." She left. Mateo looked down at Sarah. He saw the duct tape on her sneakers. He saw the calluses on her hands. He gently unbuttoned the cuff of her gray uniform and saw a bruise in the shape of a handprint, old, yellowing. "Kaylin," Mateo said softly. The beta stepped out of the shadows, looking ashamed of what he had just witnessed. "Alpha? Move her," Mateo said, standing up and lifting Sarah into his arms himself, but not to the basement. "Where, Alpha?" "My bed," Mateo said, walking toward the massive king-sized mattress where his son lay sleeping. He placed Sarah gently on the other side, so the boy lay between them. "She sleeps here, with us. Alpha, the pack laws, an Omega in the Alpha's bed. Genevieve will." "Genevieve," Mateo said, stroking his son's hair with one hand and covering Sarah with the duvet with the other, "is going to realize very soon that she made a fatal mistake." "What mistake?" "She left the witness alive." Mateo looked at the unconscious girl. "Harrison, keep her alive. Use every resource we have. If she dies, you die." 24 hours. That was how long Mateo had been awake. He sat in the armchair at the foot of the bed, a sentinel in the dark. The estate was buzzing with activity below. The wedding of the century was being prepared in record time. Trucks filled with orchids, caterers carrying trays of caviar, and designers with racks of silk suits were streaming in and out of the service entrance. The council members were arriving in their limousines. It was a celebration. Upstairs, it was a vigil. Leo had woken up twice, drank some broth, and fallen back into a healing sleep. He was going to be fine. Sarah had not moved. Dr. Harrison had set up a mobile ICU around the bed. Her body is repairing itself at an accelerated rate, the doctor had whispered earlier, checking the charts. "It's strange, Alpha. Usually silver poisoning leaves permanent scarring. But her skin, look." The gray patches were gone. Her skin was regaining a porcelain luminosity. The scars on her arms, the old ones from years of abuse, were fading. It was as if the massive surge of magic hadn't killed her. It had unlocked something. Mateo watched her chest rise and fall. He felt a pull toward her that was physical, like gravity. Inside the dreamscape, Sarah was running. She was running through a forest that wasn't the Blackwood Estate. The trees here were silver, their leaves shimmering like coins. The moon above was massive and purple. She wasn't wearing her maid uniform. She was wearing a dress made of white linen, and her feet were bare. She didn't feel pain. She didn't feel hunger. She felt powerful. "Serafina!" A voice echoed through the trees. It wasn't Mateo. It was a woman's voice, ancient, resonant. Sarah stopped, panting. "Who are you?" A white wolf, larger than any bear, stepped out from the mist. Its eyes were the color of starlight. It didn't speak with a mouth, but the words bloomed in Sarah's mind. "You have forgotten who you are, little one. The poison didn't kill you because you are made of the cure." "I'm a maid," Sarah whispered, trembling. "I'm a packless omega." The wolf lowered its massive head, nudging Sarah's chest. "You are packless because your pack was feared. You are an omega because you hid your light to survive. But the blood you gave, the blood of the moon." The wolf faded into mist, swirling around Sarah, forming a mirror in the air. "Wake up, Serafina. The usurper wears a crown of lies. Wake up and claim what is yours." Sarah looked into the misty mirror. The reflection looking back wasn't the scared girl with the mop bucket. It was a queen with eyes of violet fire. "Wake up!" Blank, back in the master suite. Mateo stood up abruptly. The air in the room had changed. The smell of ozone was back, but it wasn't sharp or painful. It was fresh, like the air after a hurricane. The window curtains blew open, though the windows were closed. Sarah sat up. She didn't groggily wake up. She sat up straight, gasping as if she had just broken the surface of deep water. "Sarah?" Mateo moved to the side of the bed. She turned to look at him. Mateo froze. Her eyes, they weren't hazel anymore. They were shifting, swirling with flecks of violet and gold. The mark of a healer wolf? No, something older. "Where is she?" Sarah asked. Her voice was clear, the hoarseness gone. "Genevieve?" Mateo asked, mesmerized by her eyes. "She is downstairs. The wedding starts in an hour." Sarah swung her legs off the bed. She wobbled, but when Mateo reached out to steady her, a spark of static electricity jumped between them, snapping loud enough to hear. Mateo pulled his hand back, shocked. It hadn't hurt. It felt like recognition. "She can't marry you," Sarah said, standing up. She looked at her hands, flexing her fingers. "The contract she made you sign. It's void." "How do you know about the contract?" Mateo asked. He hadn't told her. She had been unconscious. "I heard her," Sarah said, walking to the mirror. She looked at her reflection, touching her face. "I heard everything. I heard the wolf in my dream, and I know what she is." "She is a witch," Mateo said, "and the daughter of a high priestess." "No." Sarah turned around. "She is a leech. She steals magic. That's why she needed Leo sick. She wasn't just killing him, Mateo. She was harvesting his alpha aura to boost her own power. And she's going to do the same to you tonight." Mateo clenched his fists. "I know she is planning something, but I signed the blood oath. If I kill her, the pack suffers. The magic of the contract binds the alpha line." Sarah walked up to him. She was small, coming only to his chest. But for the first time, she didn't look small. She looked significant. "A blood oath requires pure blood to be binding," Sarah said. "Genevieve is not pure. She's been using dark alchemy to mask her scent. But the poison in my veins, it tasted like her. It tasted like rot. She reached out and took Mateo's hand. This time, he didn't pull away. The static hummed, warm and comforting. "I can break the contract," Sarah said, "but I need you to trust me. I need you to take me to that wedding." "Sarah, you can barely stand," Mateo argued, though his wolf was purring at her touch. "And everyone there thinks you're a kitchen maid. They will tear you apart." "Let them try," Sarah said, her violet eyes flashing. "I'm not the kitchen maid anymore." There was a knock at the door. Kalen entered, carrying a tuxedo. He stopped, staring at Sarah standing upright and glowing with faint energy. "Alpha," Kalen stammered. It's time. The guests are seated. Lady Genevieve is at the altar." Mateo looked at Kalen, then down at Sarah. "Kalen," Mateo said, a slow, dark smile spreading across his face. "Get the girl a dress." "A dress, Alpha?" "Yes." Mateo squeezed Sarah's hand. "Something fit for a queen. We're going to a wedding." The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Estate had been transformed into a cathedral of excess. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, their scent clashing with the heavy, expensive perfumes of the 300 guests. The elite of the lichen world sat in rows of gold chairs, alphas from the Western Territories, elders from the council, and socialites who viewed this wedding not as a union of love, but as a merger of corporations. At the altar, Lady Genevieve stood triumphant. She wore a dress of crushed diamonds and lace, a garment that cost more than the total lifetime earnings of the staff serving the champagne. She checked her watch. Mateo was 2 minutes late. "He is stalling," whispered her mother, the high priestess, standing in the front row. "Let him stall," Genevieve murmured, her eyes scanning the room. He signed the blood oath. If he doesn't say, "I do," by midnight, his heart stops. The magic is already in his veins. Suddenly, the massive oak doors at the back of the hall groaned. The chatter in the room died instantly. Mateo Blackwood stood in the archway. He was immaculate in a black tuxedo, his jaw set like granite. But he wasn't looking at the altar. He was looking at the woman on his arm. A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was the maid. But it wasn't the girl they had ignored in the hallways. Sarah wore a gown of shimmering, midnight blue silk that hugged her frame, trailing behind her like a shadow of the night sky. The fabric seemed to move on its own, rippling with a faint bioluminescent light. Her hair, usually messy and tied back, cascaded in loose waves, and around her neck sat a necklace Mateo had pulled from the family vault. The moon's tear, a diamond that hadn't been worn since his grandmother died. But it was her energy that silenced the alpha wolves in the room. She didn't smell like bleach and fear anymore. She smelled like a storm about to break. What is the meaning of this? The head councilman, an elder named Marcus, stood up. "Alpha Blackwood, you bring a servant to your wedding." Mateo ignored him. He walked Sarah down the aisle. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence. Every step was a declaration of war. Genevieve's face twisted into a mask of fury. She descended the altar steps, meeting them halfway. "Get her out of here," Genevieve hissed, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. "Have you lost your mind, Mateo? The contract forbids you from taking another mate." "I haven't taken a mate," Mateo said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "I have brought a witness." "A witness to what?" Genevieve laughed nervously, glancing at the confused council members. "Your mental breakdown?" Sarah stepped forward. She released Mateo's arm and stood toe-to-toe with the woman who had tried to kill her. "A witness to treason," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and terrifyingly authoritative. Genevieve sneered. "You seek to lecture me, Omega? Go back to your bucket before I have security throw you out." "You poisoned Leo Blackwood," Sarah stated. It wasn't a question. "You used a compound of oleander and silver ash, bound with a dark suppression spell to mimic the burning fever. You did it to force Mateo into a marriage of desperation." The room erupted in murmurs. The accusation was grave. Poisoning a cub was a capital offense in Lycan law. "Lies!" Genevieve shrieked, playing the victim perfectly. She turned to the crowd, tears springing to her eyes. "He is hysterical. The grief has driven him mad. And this gold digger is manipulating him." "Show them your arm, Genevieve," Sarah said softly. Genevieve froze. "What?" "The spell you cast to bind the poison to Leo. It requires a price," Sarah explained, taking a step closer. The air around her began to hum. "Dark magic always leaves a mark on the caster. You've been hiding it with glamour spells, just like you hide your scent with lavender." "You are insane!" Genevieve spat, but she subconsciously pulled her long lace sleeve down further. "If you are innocent—" Mateo stepped up beside Sarah, his presence towering. "Then let the Omega touch you. If there is no dark magic, nothing will happen." "I will not be touched by filth!" Genevieve screamed, backing away. But Sarah moved faster than humanly possible. She didn't strike. She simply reached out and grabbed Genevieve's left wrist. "Let go!" Genevieve panicked, her eyes widening. "Reveal!" Sarah commanded. Her violet eyes flared. A pulse of blinding white light shot from Sarah's hand into Genevieve's arm. The reaction was violent. Genevieve screamed, a sound that wasn't human. It was a distorted, demonic shriek. The glamour spell shattered like glass. The expensive lace of Genevieve's dress disintegrated. Her skin, which had appeared flawless moments ago, rippled and changed. From her wrist to her shoulder, her arm was black, rotting, necrotic flesh, pulsing with green veins. The smell hit the crowd instantly. It wasn't lavender, it was the stench of a grave. "Necromancy!" the head councilman shouted, horrified. "She is using necromancy!" The crowd panicked, chairs overturning as guests scrambled back. Necromancy was strictly forbidden. It was the art of stealing life to extend one's own power. Genevieve realized her cover was blown, her face contorted, her beauty melting away to reveal the haggard, twisted visage of a witch consumed by dark arts. "You ruin everything!" Genevieve roared at Sarah. She raised her rotting hand. "If I can't have the alpha power, no one will!" She unleashed a wave of green energy, a killing curse aimed directly at Mateo's heart. Mateo braced for impact, but the blow never landed. Sarah stepped in front of him. She didn't flinch. She threw her hands up, and a shield of pure crystalline light materialized. The green curse hit the shield and rebounded. "You have no power here, witch," Sarah said. Her voice echoed with the double timbre of the wolf, the sign of a true alpha female. This house is protected by the moon. Sarah pushed her hands forward. The light shield expanded, slamming into Genevieve. The witch was thrown backward, crashing into the wedding cake, sending layers of frosting and fondant flying. Genevieve tried to crawl away, but the Blackwood security team, led by Kaylin, was already on her. They had silver cuffs ready. "Get off me!" Genevieve screamed as they pinned her to the ground. "I am the queen! I have the blood contract! He belongs to me!" Sarah walked over to where the contract lay on the registrar's table. She picked up the parchment. It was glowing red with the binding magic. "A contract signed under fraud is void," Sarah said. She placed her hand on the paper. The white light from her fingertips bled into the ink. The red glow turned pink, then white, then vanished. The parchment crumbled into dust in her hands. "No!" Genevieve wailed as she was dragged out of the ballroom doors. "No!" The silence that followed was deafening. 300 guests stared at the maid, who had just performed high magic and dismantled a witch queen. Mateo walked up to Sarah. He didn't care about the audience. He didn't care about the politics. He took her hands, which were trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "You saved us," Mateo whispered. "Again." "I just cleaned up the mess." Sarah smiled weakly, the violet fading from her eyes, returning to their warm hazel. "That's what maids do." "No?" Mateo shook his head. He turned to the council members who were standing awkwardly, unsure of protocol. "You asked who this woman is." Mateo addressed the room. "Her name is Serafina. She is the savior of my son, and she is the only one who has ever been strong enough to stand beside me." He turned back to her, dropping to one knee. The gasps returned. An Alpha King never knelt. "Serafina," Mateo said, pulling a ring from his pocket. Not the diamond he was supposed to give Genevieve, but a simple band of white gold he had worn on his pinky, his mother's ring. "You walked through fire for a child who wasn't yours. You faced a monster to save a man you barely knew. I don't need a political alliance. I need a partner. I need a mate." Sarah looked down at him, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I'm just an omega, Mateo. I have nothing." "You have my life," Mateo said, "and you have my heart. Be my Luna." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Mateo slid the ring onto her finger. It resized instantly to fit her, glowing with a soft, confirming warmth. "Daddy!" The shout broke the solemnity. The side doors burst open. Leo, wearing flannel pajamas and looking healthy and pink-cheeked, broke away from Dr. Harrison's grip. He ran down the aisle, his bare feet slapping on the marble. "Leo!" Mateo stood up and caught his son, swinging him into the air. "Is the bad lady gone?" Leo asked, looking around. "Yes, Pop." Mateo buried his face in Leo's neck. "She's gone forever?" Leo looked at Sarah. He reached out his small arms. Sarah hesitated, but Mateo stepped closer, allowing Leo to wrap his arms around her neck, pulling them all into a tight embrace. "You smell like magic," Leo whispered to Sarah. "And you smell like cookies," Sarah laughed, crying openly now. The guests broke into applause. It started slow, initiated by Kaylin, but soon the entire room was thundering. The Alphas bowed their heads. The council members nodded in respect. They had come to see a merger. They had witnessed the rise of a queen. The storm outside finally broke. the clouds parting to reveal a full bright moon shining directly through the skylight, bathing the new family in silver. The curse was broken. The king had his heir, and the invisible girl was finally seen. The scandal of the Blackwood wedding dominated the headlines for months, but the truth was far simpler than the tabloids guessed. It wasn't about politics or power grabs. It was about the strength found in the most overlooked places. Mateo Blackwood thought he needed the best doctors and the strongest witches to save his legacy. He was wrong. He needed the heart of someone who knew what it was like to be broken, and the courage of someone who had nothing to lose. In a world obsessed with status, an Omega with holes in her shoes proved that true nobility isn't in your bloodline. It's in what you bleed for. Wow! I still get chills thinking about that moment Sarah revealed the witch's true form. What a roller coaster. If you enjoyed this story, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps the channel so much and tells me you want more stories like this. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Mateo deserved forgiveness after how he treated Sarah in the beginning? Or did he make up for it? Let's argue about it down below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a scandal. I'll see you in the next story. Stay wild.